3 small boats, no crew on board, moving at low speed toward a pier in southern Iran like they had nowhere else to be. And then, one after another, they detonate. That footage is real. It was released by the United States military itself, and it marks something that has genuinely never happened before in the history of American naval warfare. Let's get into exactly what we are looking at, piece by piece, because this one is a genuinely big deal, and I do not say that lightly. If you are new here, quick context on exactly who is walking you through this. I spend my time digging through official military statements, defense industry reporting, and verified footage so I can break stories like this down properly, separate what is confirmed from what is still speculation, and give it to you straight without the panic or the hype that usually gets attached to stories like this online. I am not a Pentagon insider, and I do not have classified access, and anyone telling you they do on a platform like this one is usually worth being skeptical of. What I do have is the patience to actually read through the primary statements and cross-check them against multiple independent outlets before I put anything in front of you, and that is the standard I'm going to hold this entire breakdown to. So let's do exactly that with this one. On July 12th, 2026, United States Central Command, which everyone in this world just calls CENTCOM, carried out a strike on Iran's Bandar Abbas Naval Base using 3 Corsair unmanned surface vessels. CENTCOM confirmed it publicly the next day, posting on social media that the strike marked, in their own official words, the first time American forces have employed sea drones in combat operations. That is not marketing language. That is CENTCOM itself calling this a genuine first, and multiple independent defense outlets, including USNI News, Breaking Defense, Naval Today, and CBS News, have all confirmed and corroborated the same basic facts around it. Here is what we know for certain, confirmed and cross-checked about the target itself. The strike hit a submarine and ship maintenance facility inside Bandar Abbas Naval Base, which sits on Iran's southern coast, right near the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz. Video released by CENTCOM, running about 25 seconds, shows the 3 Corsair vessels approaching what appears to be a raised dock holding a Gadir-class midget submarine suspended out of the water on a distinctive yellow maintenance gantry. The drones make a low-speed, uncontested approach, and the footage cuts to explosions with tall plumes of smoke, with the final blast appearing to trigger a larger fire. A geolocation team tracking the footage carefully placed the strike at coordinates in the harbor at Bandar Abbas, meaning the drones had to navigate through the base's external harbor wall to reach the target, not just approach casually from open water. CENTCOM said the operation degraded Iran's ability to continue attacking commercial shipping in the region, though I want to flag clearly and honestly that the video itself does not show the full extent of the damage, and independent battle damage assessment beyond CENTCOM's own claim has not been published as of this recording. That distinction matters, because a successful-looking video and a fully confirmed kill are not automatically the same thing. So what exactly is a Corsair, and why is everyone in the defense world talking about this specific vessel? The Corsair is built by a company called Saranac, based in Austin, Texas, founded in 2022 by a former Navy SEAL named Dino Mavroukas. It is a 24-foot autonomous surface vessel, meaning it operates without a crew on board, using autonomous navigation, multi-channel communications, and modular payload systems that let the same basic platform be reconfigured for different jobs. Top speed is documented at more than 35 knots. It can carry roughly 1,000 pounds of payload, and its range is documented at over 1,000 nautical miles, which works out to more than 1,800 kilometers. Saranac first unveiled the Corsair publicly back in October of 2024, and by December of 2025, the company had signed a production contract with the United States Navy worth up to $392 million, taking the vessel from prototype to full operational production in under a year, which, by the normal, often glacial pace of American defense acquisition, is genuinely fast. The vessel did not arrive at this moment out of nowhere either. The Navy's 5th Fleet runs a unit called Task Force 59, based in Bahrain, which is the primary hub for integrating unmanned and AI-enabled maritime platforms into naval operations. That unit traces back to January of 2024, when the Navy stood up Unmanned Task Group 59, one nicknamed the Pioneers, specifically to stress test unmanned surface vessels in the field. According to CENTCOM spokesperson Captain Tim Hawkins, the task force began fielding Corsair vessels in theater in late March of this year, initially for surveillance and reconnaissance work, watching what officials described as the pattern of life in the region to build up broader maritime domain awareness, not for strikes. Just last month in June, a Task Force 59 Corsair was used to help rescue 2 American soldiers after their Army AH-64 Apache helicopter crashed during a routine patrol near the Strait of Hormuz off the coast of Oman. Saranac's co-founder Vib Altakar spoke about that mission specifically and personally, saying the company's goal is to redefine maritime superiority and support the warfighter, and that the whole team was, in his own words, just happy that 2 American pilots made it home safely. So by the time this specific strike happened on July 12th, the Corsair had already proven itself in a surveillance role and a rescue role. This was the moment it crossed over into a genuine offensive strike role for the first time, which is exactly why CENTCOM felt the need to publicly announce it rather than let it pass quietly. It is worth being precise about the chain of events that led to this strike too, because none of this happened in isolation. Back on April 8th, the United States and Iran had entered a ceasefire after an earlier and extremely intense phase of fighting. That ceasefire held for a few months, but it began unraveling in early July after Iranian forces struck commercial tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, including a Qatari-flagged vessel. In direct response, on July 7th, the United States revoked a license that had been allowing Iran to sell oil, and President Trump publicly declared the ceasefire over, while noting Iran had at least agreed to keep talking. CENTCOM then launched a fresh wave of offensive strikes that very Sunday, hitting Iranian air defense systems, coastal radar sites, missile and drone capabilities, and small boats, described by officials as targeting Iran's overall ability to threaten shipping through the strait. The Corsair strike on Bandar Abbas was one specific piece inside that much larger wave, alongside dozens of other targets hit that same weekend using conventional fighter aircraft, naval vessels, and guided munitions. I think that context matters a lot, because some of the coverage online is treating this like sea drones single-handedly took out an Iranian naval base, and that is not really an accurate read of what happened. This was one specialized tool inside a much larger, mostly conventional strike campaign. It is also worth spending a minute on exactly what was sitting on that dock, because the specific target chosen here was not random. The submarine, visible in the CENTCOM footage, is identified as a Ghadir-class midget submarine, a small, domestically built Iranian submarine class designed primarily for coastal defense and mine-laying operations in shallow Gulf waters. Rather than the kind of large, blue water submarine other navies operate, Iran's overall submarine fleet is considered modest in size and has reportedly struggled with maintenance issues over the years, according to defense analysts tracking the region. That detail actually matters quite a bit here, because striking a maintenance facility, rather than a submarine already out on patrol, is a specific kind of target selection. It does not just remove one vessel from the water, it goes after the infrastructure Iran needs to keep its existing fleet operational at all. The cranes, the gantries, the repair docks. Hit that kind of facility hard enough, and you're not just taking one platform offline, you are potentially slowing down Iran's ability to keep its entire small submarine and small boat fleet mission capable for weeks or months afterward, which is a much larger strategic effect than the video of 3 explosions might suggest on its own. That target selection also connects directly to why the United States is worried about Iran's naval posture in the first place. Iran does not fight naval battles the way a conventional navy like the United States or the United Kingdom does, with large surface combatants squaring off against each other. Iran's naval doctrine, particularly through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy specifically, as opposed to Iran's separate conventional navy, leans heavily on asymmetric tactics, meaning swarms of small, fast attack boats armed with anti-ship missiles, rocket launchers, and limpet mines designed to overwhelm a larger, more expensive warship through sheer numbers and speed rather than matching it ship for ship. Iran has also been developing and fielding its own unmanned surface vessels in recent years, so this is genuinely a contest between two sides, both experimenting with uncrewed maritime systems, not the United States introducing a totally new category of warfare that Iran has no answer for. One defense analyst covering this strike specifically noted the irony in the tactics here, describing the Corsair operation as taking Iran's own preferred swarm concept and essentially running it in reverse, sending several small, coordinated, autonomous vessels to break into a defended harbor and hit a fixed target rather than defending against that kind of swarm attack the way larger navies traditionally train to do. The core idea behind a vessel like the Corsair is what defense writers are calling risk displacement. A crewed fast boat trying to sneak into a defended harbor like Bandar Abbas would expose American sailors to coastal surveillance, harbor patrols, mines, anti-ship systems, and the very real risk of capture. By sending an unmanned, one-way attack vessel instead, the mission still gets done, but no American life is directly on the line inside that harbor. Defense analysts at Army Recognition describe this as a shift toward what they call attritable platforms, meaning vessels cheap and expendable enough that losing one in combat is an acceptable cost, which is a very different logic than the one built around traditional destroyers, frigates, or submarines that cost hundreds of millions or billions of dollars and are treated as far too valuable to risk in a contested harbor. It also helps to understand that Corsair is not some isolated pet project sitting off to the side of the Navy's actual shipbuilding plans. It is part of a much larger, deliberate strategic shift. The Navy recently replaced an older program called the Modular Surface Attack Craft Program with what it now calls the Medium Unmanned Surface Vessel Marketplace. and the requirements published for that effort call for vessels with a range of 2,500 nautical miles, a top speed of 25 knots in rough seas, and the ability to carry 25 metric tons of payload for missions spanning strike, intelligence and surveillance work, and transport. In May, the Navy announced 7 companies advancing to at sea testing for that broader program, including Saranac alongside firms like Sea Machines, Leidos, Galliano Marine Services, Pacmar Technologies, Burden, and the major shipbuilder Huntington Ingalls. According to the Navy's own language around that initiative, the goal is described as a strategic shift in naval acquisition, designed specifically to rapidly field unmanned technologies by leaning on mature, existing commercial solutions rather than the traditional decade-plus timeline for developing a new class of crewed warship. In other words, the Corsair strike on Bandar Abbas was not a surprise one, off-gadget appearing out of nowhere. It was the first combat proof of concept for a strategy the Navy has been building toward deliberately for at least the past 2 years. Defense analysts have also been quick to point out that the implications of this reach well beyond the current war with Iran specifically. One piece from Calibre Defense made the case that CENTCOM's use of these vessels here represents an interesting use case that could be replicated in a far more demanding theater, specifically pointing to the Indo-Pacific region, where the distances involved are much larger and the potential adversary, widely understood to mean China in that context, operates a substantially larger and more modern conventional navy than Iran does. The logic there is straightforward. If low-cost, expendable autonomous vessels can prove themselves capable of penetrating a defended harbor in a real combat environment like the Persian Gulf, that is a meaningful data point for planners thinking about how the United States would need to operate in a much larger, higher-stakes contested maritime environment elsewhere in the world. That is part of why a strike that, on its surface, looks like a fairly narrow story about one facility in southern Iran is actually being read very closely by naval planners and defense analysts who are thinking well beyond this specific conflict entirely. This also is not happening in a vacuum globally. Ukraine has used exactly this kind of unmanned explosive surface vessel extensively and effectively against Russia's Navy in the Black Sea since 2022, forcing Russian warships to pull back from parts of that theater almost entirely. The Houthi movement in Yemen has also used sea drones against commercial and military shipping in the Red Sea. So, in a real sense, the United States is catching up to and formalizing a tactic that smaller, less conventionally resourced forces have already been using effectively for years. Multiple defense writers pointed out that this is genuinely the first time a major, traditional Western Navy has used lethal one-way attack sea drones in an actual wartime combat mission, rather than a smaller or less conventional force doing it. That is the specific historical marker everyone in the defense press is circling around, not just that a drone hit a target, but that it was the United States Navy doing it, at this scale, for the first time. Now, I do want to slow down here and give you the skeptical side of this too, because a story like this can very easily turn into pure hype if you only listen to the most exciting parts of it, and that is not what I am here to do. Some defense commentary since the strike has pushed back on reading too much into a single successful-looking video. One analysis from Calibre Defense made the point directly that the vast majority of strikes CENTCOM has carried out in this campaign have used conventional cruise missiles, guided bombs, and crewed aircraft sorties, and that it was those conventional capabilities, not experimental sea drones, that achieved the broader air dominance over Iran this operation has depended on. Their argument is that the Corsair strike is an interesting and genuinely new use case, but it should not be mistaken for a replacement for the conventional strike systems doing the heavy lifting in this war. A separate piece from the outlet, SOFREP, raised a more pointed question, asking what cheap actually means once you account for the full cost behind a single successful strike video, including the software, the launch platforms, the maintenance, the training pipeline, and the drones lost in testing and earlier missions that never make it into a highlight reel. Their argument was not that the technology is not valuable, but that the public and Congress deserve the full cost picture, not just a dramatic video and a contract ceiling number. I think both of those are fair, grounded critiques, and I would rather bring them to you alongside the exciting parts of this story than pretend this technology is some kind of flawless silver bullet, because it is not, and no honest analyst covering this is claiming that it is. And honestly, that kind of built-in skepticism from inside the defense press itself is a healthy sign, not a reason to distrust the story. When every single outlet covering something like this only writes celebratory coverage with no pushback at all, that usually tells you the reporting is not being done carefully. The fact that serious defense publications are simultaneously reporting this as a genuine milestone and asking hard questions about its actual cost and limitations is exactly what careful, trustworthy coverage of a story like this should look like. There's also a real, unresolved technical question sitting underneath all of this, which is what happens when the data link between an operator and one of these autonomous vessels drops in the middle of a mission. The Persian Gulf is a crowded, electronically noisy environment full of civilian shipping traffic and active jamming from multiple parties in this conflict. A system that requires a perfect, uninterrupted connection to function is not especially useful in a contested environment like that one. Reporting on the Corsair's design suggests a commander can pre-program the vessel to continue toward a fixed target, return to base, hold position, or make limited autonomous decisions on its own if that link is lost. But the full extent of how much independent judgment these systems are allowed to exercise in a real combat scenario has not been publicly detailed by the Navy, and that is a genuinely important open question, both from a military effectiveness standpoint and from a broader standpoint about how much autonomy militaries are comfortable handing over to unmanned weapon systems going forward. So where does this fit into the bigger picture of what is happening between the United States and Iran right now? As of this recording, the ceasefire that began back in April has effectively collapsed. The United States has reinstated its naval blockade on Iranian ports. CENTCOM has carried out multiple consecutive nights of strikes against Iranian military targets, and Iran has answered with missile and drone attacks, reaching as far as the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, and Jordan. Global oil prices have spiked sharply as shipping companies grow more hesitant to send tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. Against that backdrop, the Corsair strike on Bandar Abbas is a genuinely significant technological milestone, but it is one piece inside a much larger, mostly conventional, and still rapidly escalating conflict, not a standalone story that exists on its own. I think it is important to hold both of those things clearly in your head at the same time, because treating this purely as a cool new gadget story misses how serious the broader war around it actually is, and treating it purely as another data point in that broader war misses just how significant this specific capability shift actually is for how naval warfare gets fought going forward. Here is my honest read on it, for whatever that is worth. I think the significance of this strike is less about the specific damage done to one submarine maintenance facility and more about what it signals for how the United States plans to operate in contested, high-risk waterways like the Strait of Hormuz going forward. If a fleet of relatively low-cost, expendable drone boats can reliably reach targets deep inside a defended harbor without putting a single American sailor at risk, that changes the calculation for every future operation in a choke point like this one, not just this specific war with Iran. Saronic had already produced more than 300 Corsair units by May of this year, according to reporting from SelfRep, which tells you this was never meant to be a one-off experimental platform. It was built from the start to scale into a real operational fleet. At the same time, I do not think it is honest to present this as some kind of turning point that changes the overall trajectory of the war with Iran by itself. The conventional strikes, the missile exchanges, the blockade, and the diplomatic collapse around the ceasefire are still the primary drivers of where this conflict goes next, and a technological first, however genuinely impressive, is a supporting piece of that story, not the headline of it. I also want to be honest that my own read here could shift depending on what happens next. If this turns out to be a rare, isolated use of the Corsair for a single symbolic target, then the more accurate framing in hindsight would be that this was mostly a demonstration meant to show off a new capability rather than a genuine shift in how this specific war is being fought. But if CENTCOM keeps using these vessels repeatedly against harder, better defended targets over the coming weeks, that would tell a very different story, one where this technology has become a real load-bearing part of the American strategy in this conflict, rather than a headline-generating footnote. I do not think we have enough confirmed information yet to say definitively which of those two paths we are on. And I would rather tell you that honestly than pretend I already know the answer just to make this video sound more conclusive than the actual evidence supports right now. I also think it is worth remembering, underneath all the technical specifications and the strategic analysis, that this strike happened inside an active, escalating war with real consequences for real people on both sides, from the sailors who would have otherwise had to run that mission with their own lives on the line, to the wider conflict now touching commercial shipping crews and civilians across 6 different countries around the Gulf. Impressive technology does not make a war smaller or less serious. It just changes who is exposed to the most immediate risk when a mission like this one gets carried out. If you want to actually understand where this technology and this conflict go from here, here is what I would genuinely watch for over the coming weeks. First, whether CENTCOM uses Corsair vessels again in an offensive role, since a single strike could be a one-time demonstration, while repeated use would confirm this is now a standard part of the toolkit in this specific war. Second, whether Iran responds specifically to this new capability, either by adapting and reinforcing its own harbor defenses, or by accelerating its own sea drone and small boat programs in response, since Iran already fields its own unmanned surface vessels and has a long history of using swarms of small, fast boats as an asymmetric naval tactic. And third, whether Congress or independent defense oversight bodies push for more transparency around the actual cost and loss rates behind this program, given the pointed questions raised by outlets like SOFREP about what cheap really means once the full, honest picture is properly accounted for. I would also add a fourth thing worth watching, which is how the rest of the world reacts to this specific milestone, separate from Iran itself. This is the first time a major Western Navy has used lethal autonomous surface vessels in an actual combat strike mission, and that is exactly the kind of precedent other militaries study closely, both to learn from it and to think about their own defenses against it. Countries with contested coastlines and naval choke points of their own are going to be looking hard at how effective this proved to be, how vulnerable a defended harbor actually was against a handful of small autonomous boats, and how they might need to adjust their own coastal defense posture in response. Things like harbor nets, close-in detection systems, or their own counter-drone boat capabilities. In a strange way, a strike this specific and this contained can end up mattering more for what it teaches militaries watching from the outside than for its immediate tactical effect on the one facility it hit. And that is part of why I think this story deserves more attention than a typical single strike normally would, and part of why I wanted to slow down on this one instead of rushing through it in 30 seconds. It is also worth placing this inside the much longer arc of how naval warfare has changed over the past several years generally, because this did not come out of nowhere technologically either. For most of the history of naval combat, the basic unit of power was the crewed warship, and the side with bigger, better armed, better protected ships generally had the advantage. What conflicts like the war in Ukraine have shown clearly is that a relatively small, cheap, expendable unmanned vessel can meaningfully threaten or even sink a far more expensive, traditionally built warship if it is well designed and used well, which is part of why Russia's Black Sea fleet has had to change its entire operating posture over the past several years. The Bandar Abbas strike is the moment that same basic lesson formally arrived inside American naval doctrine in an actual combat mission, not just in wargaming exercises or acquisition planning documents. That is a genuinely bigger shift than most single strikes get credit for, and it is part of why I wanted to give this one a full, proper breakdown instead of a quick surface-level mention. Before I get to my own take on all of this, I want to be transparent about where everything in this breakdown actually came from, because that matters just as much as the story itself, especially with military claims that are genuinely hard for any outside observer to verify independently. Every specific fact I have walked you through, the vessel specifications, the contract figures, the timeline of when Task Force 59 stood up, the details of the June rescue mission, comes from named checkable sources, CENTCOM's own public statements, Saronic's own published specifications and public comments from its leadership, and reporting from established defense and national security outlets including USNI News, Breaking Defense, Naval Today, CBS News, Newsweek, and Army Recognition, cross-checked against each other rather than taken from any single outlet in isolation. Where a claim is coming only from CENTCOM's own assessment of how effective the strike was, I'm telling you that directly because a military command describing its own operation as successful is not the same thing as independent battle damage confirmation. Where analysts are raising open questions or genuine skepticism, like the cost transparency concerns from SOFREP or the note from Calibre Defense about not overstating this relative to conventional strikes, I'm including that too, rather than only giving you the most exciting version of the story. That is really the whole point of doing this the careful way instead of the fast way. And I would rather you trust every video on this channel a little more because of that, even if it means a slightly less dramatic script. It also means that if new, credible reporting comes out later that contradicts something I have said here tonight, I will come back and correct it directly in a future video, rather than quietly pretending it was never said, because that kind of accountability is the only thing that actually earns trust over time in a space this full of unverified claims and recycled speculation. All right, that is genuinely as deep as the verified reporting goes on this one right now, and I would rather stop here with what is confirmed than start speculating just to fill more time on camera. If breakdowns like this, the kind that actually dig into the sourcing instead of just reacting to a dramatic video, are useful to you, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because a story like this is going to keep developing fast, and I want you seeing the next update the moment it is actually confirmed, not 3 days late after it has already been picked apart by rumors online. This channel exists specifically to be the place you come back to when something like this breaks, and you actually want to understand it properly instead of just reacting to whatever headline crossed your feed first. And every subscription genuinely helps more people find that, instead of the noisier alternatives out there. And second, I want to hear directly from you on this one, because this is exactly the kind of story where the audience usually ends up shaping where I take the next video. Drop a comment and tell me whether you want the next video to go deeper on the Iran side of this specifically, meaning their own drone and small boat capabilities, and how they might realistically respond to something like this, or whether you would rather I keep tracking the broader war itself, the blockade, the oil markets, and where the diplomacy actually stands right now. If there is a specific angle here, the technology itself, the strategic implications, or the human side of what is happening across the wider region, that you feel is not getting enough attention anywhere else, say so, because I read every single comment on these videos, and it genuinely shapes what I go dig into and verify next. Thank you for watching. Thank you for wanting the properly sourced version of a story instead of just the loudest clip circulating online, and I will see you in the next one, hopefully with something confirmed, verified, and genuinely worth your time again.